Beneath our feet is a living, breathing economy with millions and millions of different players. It's a place of exchange on a level that we don't fully appreciate. And for me anyways, I want to, as a manager, then do what I can to create the conditions for a healthy economy.
There's so many aspects of this work that I'm excited about. I'm excited about what it can do for farms and ranches to make them much more resilient and self-sustaining over the long haul. And if there's ways that we can use these practices that can actually make sure that the farmer ranch is sustainable unto itself and is somewhat insulated from the ebbs and flows of input prices and market prices and all of those things, I think there's a huge, exciting piece of that. Chris Nichols, in the work that she's done with producers around Alberta and around North America, uses a pyramid to describe the principles of regenerative agriculture. And at the base level, it's a green root or a living root in the soil as much of the year as possible. The reason we want to do that is because we want carbon to be allocated to those microbes as much of the year as possible.
There's a mixture of growth there, and the new shoots that are coming that are really next year's go-to shoots are there right alongside the ones that have been growing this summer. And if we get a rain through the August and into September, they react to it. And then keeping it healthy, not grazing it right to the ground all summer, but instead goes into winter with a healthy root system and some reserves and get through and be ready to go the next spring.
We have a take half, leave half policy. So if the grass is 16 inches tall, we will graze the top 8 inches and leave the bottom 8 inches.
And then on the annuals, we've been trying to do more intercropping. So when we plant our swath grazing, we also have a biannual crop in there, trying to keep it green late into the season and also having something that'll grow up as a bit of a green flush in the spring as we await for next year's planting.
We also want diversity because we want different plants feeding different microbes, and we want to develop that interaction.
We have to begin to embrace diversity and look for it and celebrate what's growing where and humble ourselves to say, maybe that has something to teach me. On a very, very practical level, one thing that I've picked up is within your planting situation, whether that's perennial or annual, see if you can have a grass, a legume, and a forb. Challenge yourself to see if you can put that into one planting or at least some kind of rotation. And that's a great place to start.
At times, those plants are in different stages. The cattle graze off part of them. They remain vegetative. The other plants go to seed, so you have some diversity there. There's also diversity of management, and Tim's been challenging me to, we've treated this land or that paddock quite a bit the same for the last several years. Let's change it up and let's use it at a different time of the year or change its sequence somehow. So there's a lot of ways you can look at diversity, and I think you have to be aware of and use as many of those tools as you can.
Your species are like tools in your toolkit. And so depending on the job you're doing, surviving a drought, putting up with a really heavy rainy season, you're going to pull out different tools. And so if my pasture has different species, those species that are ideal for that situation are going to flourish at that time.
We want to look at the reduction of chemical inputs, that available nitrogen and phosphorus that we just put on. The plants don't have to work for it. They just get what they want. And so by that process, they don't have to give the carbon up to the microbes, and therefore the microbes starve and don't develop that system. And so we just want to look at ways that we can make sure that those plants and microbes are developing that relationship.
When you're managing inputs, I think for us, we really lean on our agronomists to help us read the soil tests and different kinds of soil tests to say, well, what's here, what's biologically available, and what could be released if given the right conditions, rather than just pouring more on. So I think it really helps to have an agronomist who's working with you in that regard towards the goal of using less.
We were able to reduce our inputs on our swath grazing just because we returned all that nutrition to the ground. We raised them up again for 2 or 3 years to try and get more tonnage. Challenged to make that bottom line work, but have since been able to drop them back again. I think we're starting maybe to capture some of that natural capacity Tim talked about to provide nutrition in the soil.
Then we want to look at animal impact, and that's really everything from working with the microbes to working with livestock, so that we're activating the carbon to be sequestered below ground.
The concept of intensive grazing is challenge and rest. Just like an Olympic athlete, all they do for 4 years leading up to the Olympics, they work really hard and then they rest over and over and over. And that's what builds their capacity and their rest and recovery rhythm and their ability to compete at a high level. So with moving of the cattle, that's what we're doing too. We stress the landscape with animals, move them on, allow for a lengthy rest.
With the ground cover, we want to reduce wind and water erosion. Has a major impact, but we also want to create a micro layer where the microbes, as they're creating heat and moisture, they're creating the best environment for germination of seeds, and so that there is a green and living plant as much of the year as possible.
Plants are that armor, and so if you've got a good cover, then that raindrop's going to hit a plant or some residue or something before it hits the soil. So then it doesn't impact the soil, it soaks into the soil. And in the summertime, if you've got cover, you've got a solar panel that's catching as much sunlight as you can. In the swath grazing dynamic, we grew at one time wheat called Piddick 62, which was the first generation of utility wheats out. And turned out it's a very tasty plant, wintering cows. And so they would eat the swath and the stubble. And one year we seeded into that in early June, and the ground was black after that seeder went through because they'd eaten all of it, or most of it. It got hot in early June, and these plants are in a 2-3 leaf stage, and they stood still for 4 or 5 days during that heat spell. Soil got too hot, no cover on it. It literally got hot enough that those plants stopped growing. Even though there was moisture there and lots of sunlight and lots of nutrition, it stopped. So after that, I never wanted to see the cows eat everything. You gotta leave something behind, girls, because we need some cover, we need some protection.
We want to look at reducing or eliminating tillage, because that tillage goes through the mycorrhizal fungi and just like cuts its arms off. And then the first thing it has to do is using carbon allocation to redevelop and regrow its arms and recreate the network. And then it doesn't get to the carbon allocations to spend the energy making glomalin so that you're getting those water stable aggregates.
You know, with perennials, we're not tilling, and in our swath grazing, you know, the only tillage is that planting operation where a knife goes into the soil every foot, cuts a little ridge and puts a seed in it, and it's only an inch or two deep every foot, so that most of that soil doesn't get tilled. The whole integrity of the natural systems, working with those systems and trying to enhance and unleash their capacity, you know, that's a pretty positive feeling from somebody who's raising food for people.